Our speaker today is Dr. Helen Weng from University of California, San Francisco. I'm Yi Xing, the co-president of Biological Society. The talk today will be, we have decided to live stream it on YouTube, besides also allowing people to join the Zoom call. So if you are on live stream and you would like to join the Zoom call, please just feel free to message us on Facebook page. The page name is Cambridge University Biological Society BioSoc to get the Zoom link, and then you can join the session. Because the session today is slightly more special in the sense that we will have a live streamed part, and after we finish live streaming, there will be a sharing session on Zoom itself, so that you can share any comments you have regarding the meditation exercise that will be led by Dr. Weng during the talk. So first of all, thank you very much, Dr. Weng, for accepting our invitation. I'll give an introduction for Dr. Weng, and then I'll again outline the session, the structure of the session today. So Dr. Helen Weng is a neuroscientist and clinical psychologist who is an assistant professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at UCSF, as mentioned. She studies meditation from a neuroscientific perspective and is interested in how meditation may foster emotion regulation to improve relational and physical health. She is developing new ways to quantify meditation skills using functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, and machine learning to identify mental states of body awareness during meditation. She is also using community engagement with the East Bay Meditation Center in Oakland, California, to increase the diversity of meditators included in neuroscience studies. Dr. Weng's earlier work showed that short-term compassion meditation may increase both altruistic and neural responses to suffering, and has been featured in the New York Times, BBC, and NPR. She had the honor of presenting to His Holiness the Dalai Lama in 2012 and 2016, and was named one of the 12 most powerful women in the mindfulness movement at mindful.org in 2019. In terms of the structure of the session today, as I mentioned, we will have a talk during which Dr. Weng will be leading 2 short meditation exercises. Each will be about 5 minutes long, followed by a Q&A session where you can post your questions on Zoom or ask questions in person on Zoom, or if you are on YouTube, feel free to post your questions on the live chat. And then after ending the live streaming, we will have a private sharing session. So you can share anything regarding maybe your experience during the meditation exercises or any comments and feedbacks. Right, without further ado, let me welcome Dr. Weng to start her talk. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. And thank you for inviting me. It's a big honor to speak. So the topic I'm going to talk about today is what I call intersectional neuroscience, which is a framework I'm building to bring diversity, equity, and inclusion to the neuroscience of meditation. And as I talk about my process through how I've developed this framework, just keep in mind whatever your field of study is. It might not be neuroscience, it might be another area of biology or a social science, that every field we have can benefit from bringing an intersectional lens or thinking about it from diverse perspectives, and also trying to make it more inclusive. So I encourage you to think about that as I'm giving the talk. Okay, so the outline for the talk, I'll talk a little bit about my background in clinical psychology and the lens through which I'm studying meditation, and also about the cross-cultural endeavor this process has been. And then I'll talk about the intersectional neuroscience framework, First, I'll talk about my research on compassion meditation, and I'll lead you through a short exercise and my neuroscience research on this meditation. And keeping in mind that I learned and used the standard neuroscience methods to study this. And then I'll describe some of my personal experiences as well as clinical experiences, learning meditation, teaching meditation, and researching meditation, and finding that experiences and data were much more diverse than similar, and that by averaging everything together, which is the standard technique for neuroscience, it actually took out a lot of the variance in the data that can actually be very useful. And so I really had to sit with all of that information because we want science to be accurate of life, right? And so I tried to figure out, how do I bring all these experiences together and then conduct science in a way that I know is more accurately representing my experience and other diverse people's experiences. And so then I'll talk about my work studying breath meditation with what I call the embodied task, and bring us through a meditation exercise and this new research I'm developing, which integrates perspectives from a diversity and social justice lens. So it changes who we're studying, how we're studying meditation using community engagement, which I'll explain, and then also using individualized neuroscience methods, which honors each person's brain diversity and takes away the need to average it together. All right. And so before I start, I just want to highlight that the University of California, San Francisco in the United States does have a research fellowship at both predoctoral and postdoctoral levels. And so when you're at those levels in your training, feel free to look us up and see if this fellowship might work for you. It's training in research in integrative medicine. Integrative medicine has a broad definition. It can have a variety of master's and doctoral degrees that is focused somehow in integrative medicine. So usually alternative or integrative aspects of health, such as acupuncture, Tai Chi, meditation, and others as well. Okay, so from the clinical psychology lens, relationships are extremely important for health. So when I'm talking to my clients, the most common symptoms are depression and anxiety, and oftentimes these symptoms are related to issues with relationships to oneself or to others. And what the literature is finding is that people that have positive relationships, so a larger number of relationships in different areas of your life, such as school, work, family, community, as well as having higher quality relationships, so close relationships, predict better health measures in both emotional health and physical health. And then the opposite is also true. So if people have lower quality relationships, fewer relationships, maybe relationships characterized by abusive interactions, that has a negative impact on health. And there are all these articles at the bottom you can look up. There are meta-analyses showing that relationship quality even predicts mortality, so that the better relationships, again, predicts longer life, and that these effect sizes are just as big as the impacts of smoking and drinking alcohol. So relationship quality and strength is as big a public health issue as decreasing smoking and decreasing drinking alcohol. And I'm just not sure how aware people are of that. And it's both biological levels and psychological levels. So I think this is really important. And so meditation is a health practice that comes from Asian cultures, from Buddhist religious traditions. And so there's been this really interesting cross-cultural dialogue where these religious practices have been brought to Western countries in a more secularized way. And we're asking, can these meditation practices be used to cultivate health? And in the United States, about 14% of adults say they use meditation to help cultivate their health. And so scientists are also working to see what effects from meditation are actually measurable and that we can say can benefit people. And so this really interesting cross-cultural dialogue has been going on for 30, 40 years, especially cultivated by the Mind and Life Institute. All right, So you can see an example of one of the Mind and Life Institute dialogues. His Holiness the Dalai Lama dialogues with scientists every year to talk about the latest questions and research in meditation. And these practices have been adapted to treat mental and physical health conditions, especially stress, depression, anxiety, pain, and cancer. And findings show moderate improvements. So there are on average improvements, especially in these areas. However, they're moderate, right? Sometimes mindfulness and meditation can be advertised as universally helping everyone for most conditions. And that's not really true. Everyone's mind is different. There are lots of different kinds of meditation practices, and they should really be adapted to fit each person. And not everyone is going to like it. So as I lead us through some exercises, just keep an open mind and see if something might fit for you. All right. So there's a lot of language around mindfulness and meditation practices. So I'm going to do my best to kind of simplify and describe what these might mean. And so meditation practices cultivate many aspects and qualities of attention. So it's not one universal thing. Just to name a few things, it can cultivate your object or focus of attention, meta awareness or being aware of what's going on in your own mind, being present centered versus past or future oriented, and also your emotional or attitudinal components, such as being non-judgmental and compassionate to your experiences. And so already you can see there are many qualities being trained. And so the simplest way I can describe why meditation may help people and may decrease stress is that they're internal tools for the power of transformation. You can practice meditation almost anywhere with almost any kind of experience. And so that makes it very portable and therefore accessible. And by practicing changing our internal attention, a lot of the exercises are on internal stimuli such as body sensations and emotional qualities. We can start to shift our relationship to our internal world, that can begin to shift our relationship to the outer world. And so one thing we need to do is slow down our attention. So many of us are very busy, we have many goals, and we're kind of going from one thing to another. And we may be relying on habits to figure out what to do from one moment to the next. And although that's very useful, sometimes we need to slow down to actually examine what's going on within us. So we can learn to start to observe and bring awareness to our inner experiences and be more open to whatever is going on. A lot of times we want to control the kinds of experiences we're having, and this is an opportunity to learn to just be present with what's happening. So breath and body focused meditations really help cultivate this aspect of slowing down. And I'll talk about that meditation. And then another aspect is to bring kindness to our experiences. So oftentimes, especially in competitive environments, we learn to have a harsh judgmental tone to ourselves and also to other people. And that mental quality where we judge, where you can understand it as quickly deciding whether something is good or bad, and therefore just two options, a dichotomous option. A lot of times we get in trouble when we think there's only two options, one's good and one's bad. Our realities are much more, many more shades of gray, right? And so by bringing kindness and not having to push away or grab onto certain experiences, but just again being present with and kind to whatever experiences we're having, it honors all of our experiences. And what happens when you do that is things start to get integrated. So I think a lot of people have mental experiences where they start to split things off from themselves, right? So things happen that are painful or shameful, and we want to just shut them out, and that actually causes problems later on. And so by letting everything be kind and present, all of these experiences start to get integrated, and we have a more kind and holistic sense of self. We can also choose a better way to treat ourselves as well as other people. How do we come up with better solutions that help each other rather than trying to just control our experiences and shutting out bad things and chasing good things. And so compassion meditation is a way to cultivate this sense of kindness. All right. And so zooming out, before I go into the micro details of those two kinds of meditations, zooming out as a psychologist, and I was learning meditation myself as well as teaching my clients, and of course I have this relationship focus, what I found is that people can use mindfulness and meditation to change their relational patterns. So something might happen, like you get into a fight with a friend or family member, and typically many of us react without awareness. This is not our fault. This is just based on our habits and conditioning. So we might yell at someone, or you might shut down and stop communicating. And we tend to repeat these cycles. They can escalate the problem. They can contribute more negativity. They can lead to worse behaviors like drinking or eating too much or sleeping too much or whatever it is for each person, and then contribute to more negative interpersonal events. And these patterns are often learned through families. They can go through generations and also are based in cultural and historical factors. And that's just to say these can be deeply rooted, and it's not always our fault why these things happen. And that's also why they're very difficult to shift and change. But with practice, instead of reacting without awareness, you bring some consciousness to what's going on, and you can start to respond with a more compassionate, mindful awareness and start to choose new ways of being and interacting with both ourselves and other people. And so this is why, in a nutshell, why meditation and mindfulness can be so powerful. So I do encourage people to try the practices and maybe learn some more about it after the talk. Okay, so as a scientist, this is a huge measurement problem. So we're teaching people to practice often with internal stimuli, and we think this might lead to external change. So there's the meditation practice itself. I've already mentioned there are many different kinds and different qualities of attention. There's different practices, like practicing when you're sitting or when you're moving, like yoga, or scanning your body, practicing meditation. And then there are all these psychological processes we think these practices affect, such as your attention, your thoughts, feelings, emotion regulation, and social connection. Then we think this might start to shift what I call micro behaviors at the psychological and health level, such as being self-aware, taking care of yourself, your daily eating and exercising, and social interactions. And as these micro behaviors build, though, that's what shifts larger global health outcomes, such as mental health and physical health conditions, as well as general wellness. All right. So as a scientist, we need accurate measurement at every single level to map this process. And we need measures at both subjective levels, so what people can report is going on, and also objective, so a third party instrument or person that can gather data in a more objective way. And so one of the biggest measurement issues that I've been working on is that when people close their eyes and meditate, we actually have no idea what's happening. We don't know what they're paying attention to moment by moment because it's so internal. And so meditation is actually a black box. And so I'll be explaining later how I'm starting to open this black box to actually see what's happening when people are meditating. All right, and so I take a neuroplasticity framework to meditation. Inherent to the philosophy is that if we can change the way our minds work, we can change our behaviors, and that also means we can change how our brains work. And so why do we use neuroscience? It's more objective and less influenced by subjectivity or people reporting how what looks good, or just having difficulty reporting on such nuanced mental states. And so our brains are one of the most responsive organs to the environment. In every moment, your brain is processing information and responding. And our brains in biology are not fixed. Adults are able to generate new neurons in the hippocampus, which we're finding out. The older views were that once we become adults, our brains are fixed. We're learning that's not so true. And scientists are studying brain changes seen due to motor training, such as juggling, musical training, cognitive training, and also now with meditation training. All right, so first we'll start with loving kindness and compassion meditation. I think compassion meditation is a route to better relationships and therefore to better health. Let's see. Okay, and I'll lead the first exercise right now. It'll be about 5 minutes. And you can keep your eyes open or closed, whatever's most comfortable for you. And in this meditation, we'll practice a sense of kindness and compassion to ourselves and also to someone we are close to and love. This meditation involves visualization and also repeating phrases. And just try it out and see how how you're responding to it, and we can save your questions for after the talk to ask questions about it. So you can close your eyes. And then just bring your attention to your breath. You can take a few deep breaths to clear your mind. Breathing in and then breathing out. And we'll spend these few minutes cultivating a sense of kindness and well-being. So first, let's bring to mind someone you feel close to, someone where you feel a sense of safety and openness. This can be a friend, a family member, an animal like a pet. It can also be a place in nature or a safe room. And just call this person to mind. You can imagine their face, maybe a time you spent with them. And just bring as much detail to mind as you can. And what it feels like to be in their presence. Where you are. You can recall vividly the colors, the sensations, the feelings as you're spending time with this person or animal or place. And just notice how your body feels in their presence. You may feel a little more relaxed, more open. You may feel a sense of warmth in the body. You may have a slight smile on your face. As you feel this sense of openness, kindness, groundedness in the presence of this person, will extend those same feelings back to them. And we'll just use some phrases that express wishing them well-being. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you live with ease. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you live with ease. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you live with ease. And now we can include ourselves in this circle of loving kindness and compassion. May we be safe. May we be happy. May we be healthy. May we live with ease. May we be safe. May we be happy. May we be healthy. May we live with ease. And sometimes it can be difficult to wish ourselves a sense of kindness, and that's totally fine. By practicing, we're planting seeds that might be able to grow later. May we be safe. May we be happy. May we be healthy. May we live with ease. May we be safe. May we be happy. May we be healthy. May we live with ease. And it's also totally normal if your mind wanders. Just bring it back to the phrases. May we be safe. May we be happy. May we be healthy. May we live with ease. Okay, and when you're ready, you may open your eyes and come back to the Zoom call. And thank you for practicing. And again, towards the end, we'll have time to discuss what happened during the meditation if you'd like. All right. So how do we actually measure compassion? So scientifically, compassion is described as the feeling that arises in witnessing another suffering and that motivates a subsequent desire to help. So there are three main components to this. There's a situation of witnessing suffering. And so in compassion meditation, we actually, when we call someone to mind, we also think about a time that they have gone through something difficult and have experienced suffering. And then emotions and motivations come up that lead to a desire to help. And so that this might actually result in pro-social behavior. And so scientifically, we want to measure all of those things. Again, in compassion meditation, we envision the suffering of different kinds of people and wish them relief from suffering. We start with a loved one and then move on to the self. And there's also more kinds of people we can practice with. So there's the stranger or neutral person, someone you don't know very well that you may see on the street. And we can also think of a time that they have suffered and also wish them relief from their suffering. And we can also think of a difficult person, maybe someone you're annoyed with or feel rejected by. And also think of a time that person has suffered and practice wishing them kindness and freedom from suffering. We also ask people to pay attention to their bodily sensations, which we call interoception. And you can also use a visualization of a light going from your heart, extending to their heart to help relieve suffering. And so I like to use the metaphor that we're strengthening the compassion muscle by starting with a lighter weight of a loved one and slowly moving up to a stronger weight of a difficult person. So it's more easy to feel compassion for someone you're close to, and then more difficult for someone you don't like for whatever reason. But imagine if we could transform our reactions into responses for healthier interactions, even with people we don't like. Just imagine if everyone had that skill in the world and how things might look different. So how does compassion meditation impact the brain in helping others? The model is if people practice compassion internally, it might actually start to translate into changing real world behavior. Previously, my lab at the Center for Healthy Minds at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, this is where I did my graduate work with the director, Dr. Richie Davidson, and they studied compassion experts like this monk that they put in the functional magnetic resonance imaging or fMRI scanner. This scanner uses magnetic energy to estimate levels of oxygen of blood in the brain. And where there's more oxygen, we think there's more brain activity. And so they found that expert meditators showed a much higher activity in the anterior insula and the mid insula in response to sounds of people suffering compared to people with less experience. And my question for my dissertation was, what about people like you and me? Does compassion meditation change our brains and how we treat others? So not everyone has tens of thousands of hours to practice. What if we just practice for 2 weeks a day for 30 minutes? Is that enough to start to change things? So I thought that compassion meditation should increase compassion, which should increase brain activity and then also increase real-world pro-social behavior. And so we studied compassion training using a randomized controlled design. We randomized people to either compassion meditation or to a controlled condition of reappraisal training, which is learning to reinterpret stressful events in your life to feel less stress. So it's a very active control condition with lots of empirical evidence, and it's one of the skills that's the basis of cognitive behavioral therapy. And so we scanned people's brains both before and after meditation training. Again, they did 30 minutes a day online for 2 weeks. And it was really important that we measure brain activity before and after so we could measure changes directly due to the compassion training. And I should mention these people had no previous experience. At the time, not many studies had this longitudinal data, so that was a big advance. And then we also measured pro-social behavior after training to see if it actually changes how people treat each other. And we developed the redistribution game, which is based in methods from behavioral economics. And so in this game, there are 3 players. Player A gets $10, player B gets $0, and player C, our participant, gets $5. In the first move of the game, player A shares 1 out of $10 with player B, and this is our model for an unfair interaction. It's about 10%. Player C watches this, and for every dollar they spend, it will take away $2 from player A and redistribute them to player B, which is why it's called the redistribution game. And this is our model for altruistic redistribution because it's costly to the participant and also impacts another person. We used an anonymous online interface to run this task. We had people sign a separate IRB protocol so that they thought they were participating in a totally separate experiment. And we also made sure afterwards that they believed that they were actually playing with other live players and only analyzed the data from those people. So our final N was 41 people. So our first question is, does compassion training increase altruistic redistribution? And what we find is after just 2 weeks of practice, the compassion group spent significantly more in the redistribution game compared to the control group, and it was almost twice as much. For the MRI component, before and after training, we showed them pictures of people suffering, and the compassion group practiced extending compassion towards those people, and the control group, the reappraisal group, practiced reinterpreting the meaning of the image to feel less distressed about it. And they also saw neutral images of people. And I showed this experiment to His Holiness the Dalai Lama at a Mind and Life meeting in 2012, and he called it effortful compassion. And his intuitions are really accurate because these are novices, people with no experience, just starting to learn compassion, and it takes effort or regulation, which we say as scientists, to start to cultivate those new skills. And so the brain regions we looked at were regions involved in emotion regulation or cognitive control, like the prefrontal cortex. And we thought it would increase concern for other people's suffering as well as decrease distress. And so those regions involve the amygdala, which is responsive to arousal and distress. We thought there would be increases in insula, which is involved in empathy and paying attention to the body. And we thought there would be increases in the nucleus accumbens, or regions involved in reward processing, because compassion is thought to be socially rewarding because of a sense of connection with other people. Because this is effortful, the cognitive control regions, such as the prefrontal cortex, should be interacting with some of these other regions involved in emotion processing. And so just a brief intro about what happens in a brain image. So you basically show people at least two kinds of different stimuli, such as cats versus dogs. We take a picture every 1 to 2 seconds, and then we compare the activity in one condition, cats, versus the other condition, dogs. And what happens is we average activity within each person and then average activity across multiple people to get this average group brain. So when you read articles, especially in the media, you're often looking at these average group pictures. All right. So our main contrast for this experiment, we compared suffering versus neutral images, and then post-training versus pre-training, again, to isolate the exact brain regions that changed due to the compassion training. And what we found is that we saw increases in the parietal cortex involved in empathy and the prefrontal cortex involved in emotion regulation, and that the people that changed their brain activity the most when they're practicing compassion are also the people that gave the most in the redistribution game. This is showing a direct link between changes in brain activity from learning compassion to actual changes in behavior. So the people who changed their brains the most ended up being the most giving. We also saw this with interactions between the prefrontal cortex and the nucleus accumbens involved in reward processing, so that the more these two regions were communicating, or the more the effortful compassion was happening, the more people also gave in this redistribution game. And this is a significantly different relationship compared to the control group. We saw that in the compassion group. So in summary, just 2 weeks of compassion training was enough to change social behavior. People could practice at home, online, so that's a benefit as well. And then greater altruism is associated with changes in neural responses to suffering and systems involved in understanding the suffering of others, or empathy, executive control and emotion regulation, social reward, and charitable giving. And we also saw decreased distress and arousal, even though people were looking more at the images, and that's in a different paper in 2018. So this meditation is freely available to download at the Center for Healthy Minds website. At this point, we have over 31,000 people who have downloaded it. So I really like to think about how all these seeds of compassion are being planted around the world and how people are becoming more kind. And the study was one of the first to show that compassion is a skill that can be trained, similarly to learning music or learning math or learning physical skills. All right. And then I always like to make this point that empathy and compassion are distinct. This great study by Klimecki and co-authors first taught people empathy training, which is feeling with someone's pain, versus compassion training, which is focusing more on the caring and concerned responses. And so they found that empathy training actually increased negative emotions because you're resonating with and feeling someone's pain similarly to theirs. And it activated regions involved in empathy processing and negative emotion processing, the insula and medial prefrontal cortex, whereas the compassion training actually increased positive emotions in response to suffering, and was correlated with greater activity in the ventral striatum or the reward processing regions. So it shows that these two different kinds of emotional responses can be differently trained and can be distinct from one another. And I think in the common understanding of empathy and compassion, they're often overlapping language, but they're actually conceptually distinct. Empathy is a necessary route to feeling compassion because you have to be aware that someone else is suffering first. And so there is some aspect of noticing or even sharing someone else's pain, but then you can also cultivate this emotional response where your mind is more focused on caring and concern for the other's pain rather than feeling as much pain as the other person. And this is really important for people that encounter a lot of suffering in their daily lives. It could be caretakers or professional healthcare workers, first responders, that kind of thing. Okay, so that was a lot of work. That was like 8 years of my life, and I did everything by the book. I averaged all the brains together. But what I saw, let's pull up one of these graphs. So we are seeing increases in brain activity related to altruistic behavior, which is really cool. But if you look at the change numbers, if you average everyone together, it lands around 0, meaning on average, people's brains are not changing. But the ones who are the ones who are giving the most. And so what I found by averaging everyone's brains together is that there were actually no changes and no differences. And it took me a long time to actually find the signal. And then in my personal experience practicing, I learned I had to modify the practices to fit the way my own mind works. Like those phrases we were repeating in the loving kindness meditation, it took me many years to learn those. Like I would always forget what the next phrase was. I would get confused. And so I realized what's the strongest sense for me when I practice is that I feel a sense of warmth in my chest area. So more bodily awareness. And I realized I don't have to use these phrases that confuse me. I can just focus on this warmth in my heart area and build from there. And then when I was teaching my clients as a clinical psychologist how to practice meditation, I learned we had to tailor them exactly for where they were in their life. Like we had to say, what exact issue is this going to help? We played around with what people were focusing on during their meditation. We're going to practice breath later. It doesn't always have to be the breath, it can be a different area of the body. And the more I could specifically tailor practices to both myself and my clients, the faster we would get better, the faster we would move through maybe a difficult experience. And I realized there's more diversity than maybe this average response. And how do we harness this diversity as a strength rather than canceling it out, right? And then how do I actually change my research approaches to fit these experiences better? And so what I did is first I changed who I was studying by increasing diversity of meditators I study using community engagement. And then I changed the actual neuroscience methods I use. So instead of averaging everyone's brain together, I use individualized machine learning, which allows each person's brain to be its own unique environment. And we find the signal specific to each person. And I also want to mention that I am Taiwanese American. My parents are immigrants from Taiwan. I am a racial minority within the United States. And a lot of my personal meditation practice, I ended up using to navigate and manage all of the emotional responses I've had through the years of being a racial minority in the United States. I think there's more and more awareness now of how stressful that can be and how people have different experiences based on their racial identity. And it can be different types of identity and minority status based on where you live in the social context there. And so at the same time, I was using my personal practice to manage all these difficult interactions. Yeah, I was almost never talking about it. I was not sharing. I went to school in a very white dominant area, and it just felt so strange that I was using my practice so much in this one area that I couldn't communicate to other people. So I've also worked on my skills in being able to talk about racial issues, about interactions that come up, and that is has been a difficult journey and process, and at the same time, there's been many positive responses to it, and people really appreciate the work I put in there. All right, so I'm going to spend about the next 20 minutes talking about the intersectional neuroscience approach I've been developing. There's a lot of details. I'm going to do my best to describe it clearly. So there's been a more established way of studying neuroscience, neuroscience of meditation and neuroscience in general. The people who study have typically belonged to what they call the weird category. This is by Henrik et al. It's not me calling people names. I just want to make that clear. So weird stands for Western/white, educated, industrial, rich, and democratic. And the majority of science is done by these people, which means that, okay. And so then an evolving way with intersectional neuroscience is our scholars are becoming increasingly more diverse, like myself, and we're going to bring new perspectives, right? And so in the United States, the people we tend to study are individual people in power. So if the scientists are weird people, they tend to also study weird people because like attracts like. And then the evolving way is to also include underrepresented people in science through community engagement. And I'll describe how I did that. And then how we study neuroscience, the scientists typically have all the power. They set the questions, the ideas, the measurements, they analyze the data, and they communicate the results through their own lens back to the public. And so in the evolving way, we're also having communities have power as well. They're dialoguing with us the entire way, and we're including them. And then for neuroscience, the typical way has been to average brains altogether. If you look at the individual data, everyone has a different brain structure and brain function. And so we're honoring that neural diversity and using individualized approaches. All right, so how did we actually increase the diversity of meditators studied? All right. I also want to point out this word intersectional to describe it a little more. So this term was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw through the law field. And you can understand it as understanding experiences of people who belong to multiple marginalized groups. So it's not just racial minorities, it's not just gender minorities, it's not just sexual orientation minorities, right? There are people who belong to multiple aspects of these groups. So for example, Black women belong to marginalized groups within both race and gender. And so their experiences are going to be different than either group alone. And so if we bring those perspectives into the work we're doing, we're one, going to learn a lot more. Two, as we're learning more, we can learn to be more inclusive of people who belong to multiple marginalized groups. And the more inclusive we are of people who experience more oppression, the more we're doing to undo that oppression, if that makes sense. So why race and ethnicity in the United States? In a few decades, over half of the United States population will be racial and ethnic minorities. If participants we study are not representative of the greater population, then results are not generalizable. And scientists often want to be able to say their results generalize to larger groups and larger populations. So are we then serving people that belong to these groups if we're not including them in our studies, right? And then are these demographics represented in academia? So there's been much more awareness, especially around race and gender in the past few years. And academics are asking themselves the same questions and learning that we also need to be more inclusive and diverse. In the United States, we also have many disparities based on racial groups, such as rate of employment, socioeconomic status, educational opportunities, police violence, imprisonment, health disparities, so cardiovascular disease, diabetes, etc. And we're learning that social determinants of health, so how you're treated, right? What access to resources and opportunities you have directly can have an impact on biological functioning. And so I think this is a really exciting field of research to study and then to figure out how do we undo some of these harmful effects. So I did an analysis of the demographics of people in the neuroscience and meditation studies. We did find statistically that there was an overrepresentation of white Caucasian people and an underrepresentation of especially Black or African Americans, Hispanic or Latinx people, and American Indians and Alaska Natives. And so in my particular subfield, we have work to do. And so I'm very fortunate. So I live in San Francisco, and across the San Francisco Bay is Oakland, and the East Bay Meditation Center has been established in Oakland, and they were directly founded by people belonging to minority groups, LGBTQ people, people of color, or racial minorities. And their mission was to foster liberation, personal and interpersonal healing, social action, and inclusive community building. So they're already one of the most diverse meditation practice communities in the United States. So I was really fortunate to be able to start working with them. Their main goal is inclusion. Please check out their website. They've created a really inspiring multicultural community. Their values are diversity, social justice, community building, and transparent governance. That's centered in Buddhism, but also teaches from other wisdom traditions, as well as in secular ways. It's not lineage-based or single teacher focused. They really try to de-emphasize this like one powerful teacher model. And the leadership structure is where every group they have has its own governance structure and is mostly run by volunteers, so it's more egalitarian. And everything is run by donation only, so they're actually run completely by donations and trying to have an alternate model to capitalism. So they have different groups for different minority groups. So this is an example of the people of color Sangha. Here's the Alphabet Sangha, which is the LGBTQ plus community. And there's so many groups within there that they just call the Alphabet Sangha. There's a yoga group for people of color. There's the Every Body, Every Mind Sangha, which is for people with chronic health conditions and disabilities. And so they can teach, they're self-created and they teach themselves, right? Because they have their own experiences in mind. So it's already more culturally sensitive. They've also created this culture of social justice. So they have these agreements for multicultural interaction, which they hang right on the wall. And these are principles to live by to actually foster communication between different groups. So one is trying on a different perspective, right? Being open and less judgmental, realizing that there's a difference between your intent and impact. So oftentimes people will intend, to be kind and inclusive, but the way they say their words impacts people belonging to other groups in different ways. And can we learn to be sensitive and hear people when they say, hey, the way you said that didn't feel right. Here's another way to say it. Can we be open to feedback like that? Another important one is move up and move back. So people that have historically had more social power feel very comfortable speaking a lot, exerting power, controlling resources. And so those people might have to learn how to take a step back. Whereas people belonging to historically marginalized groups, less access to resources, less speaking space, less access to, all of the resources, they might need to practice moving up. What does it feel like when I use my voice more or have more decision-making power? And so that these are all micro interactions that help start to equalize power dynamics. They have all these wonderful classes, long-term programs, talks, and websites, so please check out their website. So in terms of community engagement, so scientists like to think of themselves as purely objective, right? That's just not true. We're all socialized in certain ways. And so the best we can do is to become more aware of the way we're socialized and start to shift our own dynamics to be more equitable. So in community-based participatory research, it's an emerging transformative research paradigm which aims to enhance well-being of underserved populations through cultivating ethical, respectful, and responsible relationships with participants and the community. And so this is very different than typically scientists view themselves as objective while they're exerting a lot of power over the people they study. This is acknowledging, hey, scientists have privilege, and we're going to interact with the people we study in a much more equitable way. So the community and academics are engaged throughout the entire research process, from conceptualizing the problems, right, through what is evidence, the language we use. So language has a lot of embedded power dynamics within it. So reconceptualizing language is a lot of this work. And then business as usual within academia, which usually means like crazy time deadlines that we inflict on other people. And how sustainable are the interventions we're coming up with? Will it actually help the people we want it to help? Will it actually keep going through the community? So oftentimes scientists will come up with this great intervention that never gains legs or traction in the community and therefore never positively impacts people. And then also addressing lack of trust, which is huge. So it's an embodied process. You have to practice cultural humility, understanding that your views are not the only view, and when to take a step back. You include people at every step, from design to publication. There's continuous dialogue, clarity over time and compensation. And then if you compare this with your interactions with people who already have more privileged status, maybe a famous scientist you want to work with, you automatically are humble, you include them, there's communication, there's clarity over time and compensation. It's when you are interacting with someone who belongs to a social group with less privilege than you that those things start to slip away and that you think you're just owed things. So it's a big practice to start to recognize these interactions and start to learn a different way. So with community engagement with the East Bay Meditation Center, first we engaged key community members, Xiaojing Weng and Musha Makita. And Musha is one of the core teachers, and she made sure that I was safe enough to interact with them. So even though I'm a racial minority, I still have lots of privilege, especially with education. And she checked that I was able to check my own privilege, right? Be able to slow down, to listen and integrate her feedback. And so I had to show that to her first before she would allow me to interact with the rest of the community. And so then they helped me create a focus group where we created more culturally sensitive neuroscience procedures for racial and ethnic minorities, LGBTQ people, people with disabilities, chronic illness, the fat community, and people with lower income. And so all these kind of standard procedures I learned, the language we use, who's included, who's not included, we revisited everything and made it much more culturally sensitive. And we had community events at the East Bay Meditation Center. So I went there and showed them my study and got even more feedback, and did things like created a new consent procedure for sharing demographic and brain data from groups that have been historically, their data has been misused or used to misrepresent them. So we instead created a consent procedure for that. All right, I'm going to keep talking for 15 more minutes to get through everything. Just let me know if that's okay or if that's not okay. As expected, I included too much detail. So I wanted to give an example of cultural humility because it's easy to say, oh yes, I'm a humble person. Yet we have to be aware of when our social conditioning creates these power dynamics where we just expect people to do things we want them to do, right? And so one way of expressing cultural humility at the outset with the East Bay Meditation Center, I openly just addressed, I know there's a history of scientific and academic communities sometimes taking advantage of underrepresented communities, and I want to make sure these dynamics are not repeated, and I'm open to any dialogue regarding these dynamics if they appear to be at play. So I'm saying, I'm aware of the history, I'm open to feedback, I can change my behavior. And there's also a difference between saying that and actually embodying that and being able to do that. So when I kind of share information about this approach, I tell people you have to really know for yourself that you can take this feedback, because oftentimes when people from a more privileged group gets feedback from a group with less privilege, there's a lot of defensiveness and pushback. So we have to use our meditation practice, mindfulness practice to manage those reactions. And this actually did happen. There were miscommunications, misunderstandings. You know, I've been working with them for 4 years, and they've had to tell me things, and I've had to take that feedback and show them that I'm willing to do this work. All right. So we made a lot of cultural adaptations. One, we're using neuroscience methods that allow for individual brain diversity. And so people that we typically exclude, we can now include. So left-handers, people with chronic health conditions that don't affect breathing, people with neurological conditions, and people with mental health conditions that don't substantially impact attention in their daily functioning. So for most neuroscience studies, if they're not studying a certain clinical population, that means they automatically exclude left-handers and people with any kind of chronic health conditions. And that's actually excluding quite a large percentage of the populations. So we revisited that. We made the study more person-centered and inclusive, again, changing a lot of our language just to be from the perspective of the person who's going to be in the study instead of from the perspective from the scientists. So we just tell them everything the study involves, and then they can make an informed decision about whether the study is good for them or not whether the participant's good for the scientist, but whether the science study is good for the participant. We made a lot of different cultural adaptations. I'll just mention a few as an example. So the way we ask for racial demographics, first we honor people's lived experiences by asking them to self-identify their race. So with which race or races do you identify? And they can use whatever language they identify with. We ask about people being multiracial because there are more and more multiracial people who are often left out. And at the same time, we use the standard scientific classification that, again, is based on each country's history and social makeup. And we put science in its social place by saying, for the purpose of scientific reporting, with which races do you identify? And then they can choose. Same thing with gender identity. How do you self-identify your gender? People can use the words that fit them the best. And then we say some reviewers of the study may ask for gender to be presented with general categories. And then we ask them to pick which general gender category do they identify with for the purpose of science. So acknowledging this is not fully representative of reality. However, scientists need to put things in certain categories and letting them choose. So putting as much power over identity for our participants as possible. And we also ask people for their pronouns. So then we use the correct pronouns when we're interacting with them. All right. And I was able to show this study to His Holiness the Dalai Lama in 2016, and he was super interested in the multicultural community that the East Bay Meditation Center has built. It's very unique, and I think this is the organization I've seen it embodied the most that I've ever encountered. So it's really inspiring. Again, check out their website, eastbaymeditation.org. And so by getting all this feedback from them and actually implementing it, our meditators were more diverse. So we ran 15 people through an fMRI study. 80% were racial and ethnic minorities, and 53% were LGBTQ people. And this is likely one of the most diverse neuroscience studies of meditation in the literature. Okay, so for the second part of intersectional neuroscience using individualized neuroscience, I'll show you how we did this. So the breath and body meditations are really important because our minds need to be able to read the instruments of our bodies, right? Our bodies are what get us through life. It has physical needs like hunger and thirst and rest. And then also our emotions are expressed through our bodies. These are images of people indicating where they feel more activation or less activation in their bodies, depending on the emotion. You can see it's different based on like happiness versus sadness, etc. And a lot of the kind of data is centered around the core. So the face, our faces express our emotions, our lungs and chest with breathing, right? Our stomach, digestion, and we hold a lot of tension in our backs, right? And so in my psychotherapy experience, I had to bring people and have their mindful tension kind of pass through the inner core of their body to start to learn how to read their emotions better. And most of us are not taught how to do this in day-to-day life. And so it's kind of a retraining of the mind to understand what our bodies are telling us. All right, and this is again just to show all the different body regions that are activated by different stimuli in the environment. Read up on that. So I'm going to lead us through a brief exercise and then go over the neuroscience data. So you can close your eyes again. And just gently bring your attention to the sensations of the breath. This could be air flowing through the nostrils, at the back of the throat, down into the lungs, the diaphragm moving up and down. And see if you can attend to the sensations of breathing. And if another area of the body is more comfortable for you, feel free to use that as your object of attention instead. Maybe feelings in your hands or the back against the chair. Just notice where you feel the sensations the most clearly in your body, and just keep your attention in that area. And if your mind wanders, that's totally normal. Just gently bring your attention back. Thoughts will come up. It's again totally normal. Just gently bring your attention back to the breath. Just use these last few moments to check in with your body. How is your body doing? And when you're ready, you may open your eyes and come back to the talk. All right, so I'm going to take the last 5 minutes here to describe how we studied this process using the individualized neuroscience methods. And I just want to say, like, it's not always clear why meditation can help with stress. One thing it can do is it can help with stressful thoughts. So I call this like the runaway train of our thoughts, right? This happens to all of us. We get worried about something, we start to kind of spin out of control. Our thoughts can kind of get more negative if we're not in a good mood. So it can start this chain of negative thoughts and feelings, especially some people worry about the past, which can lead to depression. Some people worry about the future, which can lead to anxiety. And these thoughts might be self-critical. So what meditation does is that it helps us calm down this part that can get into this thought loop. And so this is called the default network, which is a part of our minds that's kind of always on to try to figure out our lives. So it calms down the default mode network, and it increases the network involved in paying attention to our bodies, or interoception, and the insula is heavily involved in this. So when you are focusing more on your breath, it activates the insula, and then if your thoughts are starting to quiet, it deactivates the default mode network. And so meditation is actually a bunch of different mental states, right? You're on your breath, and then you mind wander about dinner or eating, and then you come back to the breath and you get sleepy. So all these different things happen, and most studies average everything together But what we really see is that it's fluctuating. So this study showed it had people press a button when they started to mind wander, and that activates a different network compared to when they're focused on their breath or when they're mind wandering. So it's really a set of fluctuating mental states. This is a meta-analysis that averages all the averages together, and you can see generally, different areas increase, like the premotor cortex during focused attention, the insula increases. However, if you look at each individual brain, you see there's a different brain structure, different brain shape. And what we do to average activity is that actually mathematically warp and normalize individual brains to look like average brains. And this is just the underlying philosophy behind that is that people's brains are built the same and work the same. And through my research and clinical and personal experience, that's just not true. And so we use this individualized approach. We use machine learning, and we're going to use machine learning to recognize when people are on their breath or engaging in interception or mind wandering during meditation. So the way we do that in machine learning is you have to feed the computer training data or data from which it's going to learn certain patterns. So we directly tell people, pay attention to your breath for about 16 to 30 seconds. Then we switch the instruction and say, you can stop now, and that should induce mind wandering. Then we say, think about the past week or think about the next week. And that's thinking about their lives or engaging in self-referential processing. And we have two control conditions of pay attention to your feet and pay attention to the sounds. And in that way, the computer is slowly collecting data and learning the unique brain patterns for each mental state. I'm going to go through this quickly. And so first we have to test, does the machine learning algorithm, can it even differentiate between these 5 internal attention states? Because we have people close their eyes the whole time. The only thing that's changing is their internal focus of attention on the breath or their thoughts or something like that. And what we see is that every single condition in our study is recognized well above chance by the computer. It means even with their eyes closed, when they're focused on their breath, that brain pattern is distinct from when they're mind wandering and from when they're self-referential processing. This worked in all 8 meditators and 6 out of 8 control participants. And then you can see each person has a unique brain signal for focusing on the breath. Across different people, it looks different. And then there's a unique signal for the 3 different conditions: breath, mind wandering, and self-referential processing. And again, the signal, even for the same mental state, is different and very obviously different through visual inspection for each person. So the real power of this is once the computer learns your own unique signal for breath, in a separate period of 10 minutes of meditation, we ask, does their brain picture look more like breath, more like mind wandering, or more like self-referential processing, so that it can decide based on objective neural evidence what people are paying attention to when they're meditating. Again, linking it back to the black box of meditation. When people close their eyes, we actually have no idea what they're focusing on. And so we can read people's mental states during meditation based on their own unique brain data. Here's meditator 1 versus meditator 2. Each person has a different set of brain signals, and you can see each person's mental states are fluctuating at different rates based on their own meditation session. So when each person meditates, something different is happening for each person. And this is why not all meditations work for all people. It's really about finding what works for you. What can help you settle and focus more? This person can focus more on the breath pretty well. For another person, it might be music, or it might be looking at nature. And then we can quantify these into events. And this is the real power of this. So we are computing novel metrics of attention during meditation. What percentage of the time were you on your breath? What percentage of the time were you mind wandering? And again, each person has a different profile because each person's meditation session is unique. And then we assessed the attention profiles across all 14 people and found on average people were attending longer to the breath versus mind wandering and self-referential processing. Because when their minds were on the breath, they were staying there a little longer. So the mean duration of how long they were on their breath is a little longer. as if they're remembering that's what they're trying to focus on. So overall, we think this is supporting the idea that people are engaging with the breath more during breath-focused meditation. This paper is now published and available at Frontiers in Human Neuroscience. We also replicated these findings in the diverse meditators from the East Bay Meditation Center, and this preprints at mindarchive.org, and it describes the entire intersectional neuroscience framework. So I have 2 papers out now on this. And to further this work, we're also including the voices of the diverse meditators and how they study loving kindness meditation. So we just ran 8 focus groups, having people describe their experiences of practicing loving kindness and how it can help with experiences around identity. So again, including the people you're studying more and more into the research process. All right, so I think I'll just end with this note that each person's mind is different. There are many different practices, many different qualities of attention you can train with meditation. So make it work for you. Figure out what works for you. Try different practices out. Feel free to adjust. Practice with what comes naturally, what you want to pay attention to. We all gravitate towards certain things. So I really love music, so I meditate with music a lot. And then to expand and grow, you can apply these skills to growth areas or things you don't really like. It's kind of like the difficult person, right? So I really don't like conflict. And I learned how to stay mindful and calm during conflict, and learn how to talk about things like racial differences, which provokes a lot of conflict. And so that's really where I learned to become more resilient and how to develop the power of my voice. And that's one of the reasons why I had this honor of being named one of the 12 powerful women in the mindfulness movement, because people understand how difficult it was for me to speak up on all these issues. So thanks to you all. I had many mentors and collaborators, so I want to thank them as well. I'll stop there.
Right, thank you very much, Dr. Weng, again for the talk. So now we'll be having the Q&A session. If you want to post your question on the Zoom chat, feel free, or you can send it directly to me. Or if you're on YouTube, feel free to post it on the YouTube live chat. So maybe I'll start with a question that I got from before we started the session. So we collected questions on Google Form. So the question is, would you mind explaining the machine learning method? I think the name is multi-voxel pattern analysis.
Yeah, so machine learning has a lot of applications, right? So with fMRI data, it's called multi-voxel pattern analysis, or MVPA. And in the approach, you have to first have a set of training data so that the computer can learn what each brain pattern looks like. And so you need enough example data sets to feed it. And so we had about 400 data points per condition. So attending to the breath, mind wandering, self-referential processing. And the way we collected the data is we instructed people exactly where to place the attention. So we'd say, now focus on your breath, right? And give them 30 seconds to focus on their breath. And then we would say, now think about what happened in your life last week. And they'd have 40 seconds to think about that. And we kept switching, because if you let it go on too long, people will their minds will go all over the place. So the way we worked around that is giving people short instructions of where to place their attention and slowly collecting high enough quality data. This study was particularly challenging because it's internal attention. We had people close their eyes the whole time. And so a lot of the studies the training data is based on external stimuli, right? So a lot of this has been developed with facial recognition, object recognition. You can visually see the differences between like a bottle versus a shoe kind of thing. And so it's very easy to verify, okay, this is the brain pattern for bottle and this is the brain pattern for shoe, because there's already a visual difference. With this, the difference between breath and mind wandering can be pretty subtle, right? So we did that by giving it higher quality training data, and then we have to assess whether this training data is accurate. So what we do is, it's called cross-validation. So you feed it a subset of training data. So we had 6 sets of training data with over 400 data points per condition for 5 conditions. So there's actually over 2,100 data points in this study. So if we have 6 sets, say, you feed it 5 sets as the training data, and you leave out the 6th set and use it as the test data to see, okay, can the computer accurately recognize when we told them to focus on their breath based on the other 5 sets of data. And then you iterate each data set until every single data set acts as a training data set and a test data set. And you come out with a percentage accuracy score, classification accuracy. And it just needs to be above, significantly above chance. So in my study, we had 5 conditions. Chance level is 20%. So if the computer can only recognize each mental state at 20%, it means it can't differentiate between the two. It's at chance. But all of our conditions were recognized at 40% to 50%, which is more than double chance levels, which means it can statistically recognize when people are on their breath, higher than mind wandering and all the other conditions. So it's not perfect recognition. Like in object recognition, the scientists can get it up to like 95% accuracy, which I'm very jealous of, but we're working with internal mental states, right? Isn't it crazy? We all have these like internal worlds that may or may not be connected to the external world. It's different for each person. So to get 40 to 50% accuracy for internal states, blank screen, right? There's nothing visual different, was quite good. And to me, it was better than I thought it could be. So we were quite lucky there. It does work better with experienced meditators. So this all hinges on the assumption that when we tell people to pay attention to their breath, that they can do it well enough to get the computer consistent data. And so we tested in 8 control participants, and for 2 of them, so 25%, the computer couldn't recognize the difference. It was at 20% or lower. So this suggests that people that have less experience in practicing placing their internal attention in a certain way, that even when we told them focus on your breath now or think about your life now, the signals were not consistent enough. They were probably like mind wandering most of the time or something like that. I hope that was more clear. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks very much for explaining that. I have one question from Zoom. Could you elaborate on the protocol for including left-handed people in the neuroimaging studies?
Mm-hmm. So most studies, because they use the group average approach, will just flat out exclude left-handers. Like I actually saw an article on slate.com or something recently, a whole article about this, like why are left-handers excluded? And it's because their brains are lateralized differently. So they're left-handed, that means it's controlled by the right hemisphere. If you're right-handed, it's controlled by the left hemisphere. And that creates variance in their neural structure and function. And so they're just usually excluded from every study. If you use an individualized approach, it doesn't matter, you know, what hand you use to write with. We're going to find your unique signal for breath. And it's ironic because a lot of studies are not studying handedness, right? If we're studying handedness, we would want to know and include and exclude people based on their handedness. But a lot of studies are studying other things like emotions or memory, and it might not have an effect at all, but it's just one of these inherent norms and biases. And so if we use an individualized approach, we can start to question all these like normal things we used to do. And that's what I did with the East Bay Meditation Centers, that they just pointed out, they're like, why do you do this? And I'm like, I don't know, why do we do that? And I had to re-examine and change.
All right, thank you so much. There's 2 more questions from the, Zoom. So the first one is that, do you think that the emotion body localization studies could be affected by language and expressions used in a given language?
Oh, that's a good question. If they can be changed by language. Yeah, I think I have to think about this a little more. So I don't study language per se. So one thing that meditation does is help us tune into the experiences before language, right? Just our body sensations. And a lot of us, our minds are chattering minds are going on all the time that we don't even realize that there can be times when it's more quiet and we could just sit with like the experience of feeling sensation in our body. And so with more meditation practice, those mental states start to become more differentiated. In terms of if you speak a different language, will the brain represent things differently? I think that could be really true. So I'm trying to think of an example. So if there's a culture where there's more language for certain experiences, like I find there's very little language about paying attention to our bodies, right? But if there are cultures that it's more inherent in the culture and they have more words for it, maybe those mental states can be more easily represented or use more of the brain to represent it. So I think those are really interesting questions that scientists should test, and you can test as well.
All right. Yeah, thank you. So another question is that, does meditation work as well for people with psychological conditions like ADHD, depression, PTSD, etc.? And is there any evidence to show that it could help them?
Yeah. So again, I want to make sure people don't think meditation universally works for every condition or every person who has that condition. I think on a much more case by case basis as a clinician, because I had to work with such different people. That being said, on average, the findings that are strongest for meditation interventions, which are usually 8 weeks, like at least 30 minutes practice a day, so it's quite intensive, seems to help stress, reported depression, reported anxiety, and pain. Those are the strongest findings. And again, to emphasize why this may be the case. So we get in trouble when we get too attached to our thoughts, especially if they're negative, right? If we believe all the negative thoughts we have. And so people with depression, sometimes they're more focused on the past, right? Something bad happened to you and you keep ruminating about it. With meditation, it helps you get more in the present and helps loosen the strength of the thoughts because you're paying more attention to your body than the thoughts. With depression, they think it's not great to start practicing when you're actively depressed because those thoughts are so strong. It's hard to loosen them, like what you're learning with depression with meditation. So they think other kinds of psychotherapy like cognitive behavioral therapy, medication might be better first line responses for depression. But meditation can really help people once they're recovered from depression to prevent getting depressed again, because meditation trains awareness of your own mind or meta awareness. So you can start to recognize your symptoms earlier. Like, what are your symptoms for you? So there's one person I worked with who said, oh, I can tell my mood is worse when I get up and to make coffee and I don't want to make coffee. So there's some symptoms that like are generally for everyone, like your thoughts get more negative, you might become more tired, or on the flip side, more excitable. But we all have our individualized experience as well, right? How do I know when I'm not feeling well? Like I told my roommate once, if I don't dress, like I wear nice clothes every day, no matter what, even if I have nowhere to go. And I'm like, if I ever look like I didn't get dressed in the morning, just point that out to me, because that would be a really bad sign for me personally. So it helps with anxiety again, because anxiety is much more future oriented. You're worrying about things, like there's so many things to worry about. All these different scenarios can happen. So meditation helps you again focus on the present, focus on sensation rather than the content of your thoughts, and starts to loosen the thoughts. And that's why it helps with anxiety. With PTSD, I think I would never treat PTSD with just meditation. There's this thing where meditation helps you to start to look in. So sometimes what can happen is that the things that have been buried or hidden away start to come up. And so so traumatic or difficult experiences can actually start to come up with meditation. And so with PTSD, the first line is always working with a therapist, working with an empirically supported treatment to work through trauma experiences, so cognitive processing therapy, exposure therapy. However, meditation can be supportive because you're learning to be present with and kind to all your experiences. So the difficult thing with trauma is that when trauma gets revisited, it can be painful and hurtful again. If you learn this more non-judgmental, kind form of attention, that can help to reprocess the memories in a different, more helpful way, which needs to be done with a skilled therapist. However, meditation skills can help support the process. I would never say prescribe that as the only thing.
All right. So do we have any more questions from Zoom? Feel free to ask in person or just send it to the chat. I myself do have one question. So I read an article some time ago about mind wandering, actually. So like the opposite of being mindful, I would say. It says that, you know, like people nowadays are like, they tend to be so focused on being productive, so they're like always doing things, never really slowing down to just sort of like empty your mind. Or so like the article was suggesting that maybe if you actually take some time every day to let your mind wander, it might actually be beneficial. So in your opinion, how would that actually be helpful to reduce your stress and maybe compared to mindfulness? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I like that idea of like structured time to mind wander. So there's this great paper by Kalina Christoph, which tries to categorize the different types of mind wandering. And so within that category is, so I talked a lot about the bad stuff, like the rumination, like worrying, because when our minds wander to those things, that can be a bad sign, right? But there's also many positive sides of mind wandering. There can be creative thinking, there can be daydreaming, there can be like sometimes good ideas pop up even when you're not trying, right? It's just your mind doing its thing. And so scientific studies show that through like smartphone app studies show that people mind wander 25 to 50% of the time. So it's a very, very common thing. So I don't like this idea that we should be 100% focused all the time. That's like not normal. And it's really difficult. It's very effortful. It's effortful for us to focus, right? So we can't be using our effort and energy all the time like that. We need time for rest. And so I'm like a big proponent of like having structured schedules. I know this is very difficult when you're a student and studying, but like if you can have a structured schedule where, okay, I only study for this amount of time, and then I always have this block of time off, except during, you know, crazy exams or whatever, but I always, you know, have 8 to 10 p.m. to myself to do whatever I want. We all need that restorative, restful time. And really wonderful things can happen through mind wandering. So I don't want people to think mind wandering is always a bad thing. But meditation can help us have a little more influence about if we want to focus, can we?
Yeah. So yeah, I guess because I think one common example of good ideas popping up when you are not paying attention is when you are showering. So many ideas can pop up, and they just kind of, they might actually be like solutions to your problems. So yeah, maybe it would be really nice to be able to to allocate some time for mind wandering and also for mindfulness practices. So just one last question, I guess, because of the time. So there's one short question from the Google form, which is how can one control their anger?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's kind of taboo to talk about anger, right? And it's really interesting how different cultures socialize people, where some emotions are more acceptable than other emotions, right? So with anger, so in my view, all emotions have an evolutionary purpose and are useful in some way. The trick is for us to understand their message and then to process in a healthy way and then to express in a healthy way. So anger is a really tricky one because it's so like consuming, right? It can really overtake you. But what it's signifying is that some boundary or value of yours has been violated. So I would first identify what is making me angry, what happened that is causing these reactions, and then to use a mindfulness practice or whatever self-care practice. Like I process a lot of my emotions through taking walks because like the movement is very helpful. Where do you feel the anger in your body? Like it can be a lot in the chest, a lot in the face, or a lot muscle tension. Where do you feel it in your body? What does it look like and feel like for you? Because what happens is that emotions have a physical reaction, right? It signals sent to our heart, our stomach, our endocrine system. And a lot of that's happening on a subconscious level. And that subconscious activity can then cause like reactions that we have less control over. So this is a way to have a little more control, is that let me just feel what it feels like in my body and let me feel this way. So I suggest having a way to more healthfully process it. Like you can listen to angry music, or you can write down your feelings, or you can like do like kickboxing or whatever, something physical, um, to help get out that physical emotional charge. And then ask yourself, what do I need? Because it's if it's telling you a value has been violated, it actually means there's something I need that I'm not getting. And then and figuring that out for yourself and writing it down, or you can talk to a friend or a therapist. And so maybe you're realizing, like the thing I'm always challenges this, people want my time like all the time and just demand it all the time. So I ask myself, what do I need? How much free time do I actually have? Um, and I start setting those boundaries, and I'm like, what do I do if someone asks me for time and just demands it? And I just decide, okay, I tell them how much time I have, what I need if I'm going to spend time on something, and just learn to communicate that. And so I do a lot of practice with language. Like if I just say things how I feel them, they will come out angry and dysregulated. So there's often this time lag. If you can build in time to process the anger, understand what it means for you, and then figure out how do I express my needs in a kind and assertive way. This could be through email, this could be through face-to-face. I find email a little easier, or text, because face-to-face, we kind of escalate a little faster. And then just gently and assertively say what you need from people, and see where it goes from there. Some people are responsive, some people are not. So I usually have a game plan. What if they say no? What if they're not responsive? So I usually have multiple game plans to figure out. Yeah, and sometimes you have to accept a situation as well, even if it's unfair.
Okay, I think if there are no other questions, we'll end the live stream soon. So thank you again, Dr. Weng, for the very eye-opening, I would say, talk, and I hope everyone has enjoyed it. So if you would like to stay after the live stream on Zoom, feel free to stay. If you have any things to share, any experience, any things that you experienced during the meditation exercise, feel free to stay.